Welcome to Type Tune Tint. I'm Tom Kranz. Did you ever think you're simply not good enough when really you are? I hear it all the time on this podcast from guests who never thought they had permission to create. This is classic imposter syndrome, the feeling that we don't deserve our talent, skill, or success, that we are imposters in our own minds and bodies. Today's guest, Mike Seeley, was that guy once upon a time, until he had a talk with himself and decided he really did belong in a room full of high achievers. Today, Mike coaches managers, companies, and even creatives on how to break free of preconceived notions and how to turn failure into opportunity. His book, Mindset Unlocked, is the roadmap. And I'm joined by Mike Seeley from his palatial estate in the suburbs of London. I love the fact that, we can do these global interviews now in modern times through tech. Mike, I really appreciate you joining me here today. Thanks. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks, Tom. And it's great to be invited onto your show.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my audience knows that this is primarily a podcast about creativity and kind of discovering creativity that lurks in our lives under, layers of denial and trauma and God knows what. But a subject that comes up frequently here is the subject of what has become known as imposter syndrome. Basically, I'm not good enough to do this, or I need permission to do this. And I saw that one of the things that you specialize in and talk about is helping people get over that. But that's a very small part of your thing. You are, as we see in the book Mindset Unlocked, which is your latest book, you've written 3. This book opens all kinds of possibilities, and this is what you're about, which is basically kind of trying to coach people to embrace things like, what does failure actually mean? You are actually good enough. How do we overcome that stuff? Am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. And I think one of the additional things I do with regards to the coaching is I help people to understand where that self-doubt has originated from. Most people don't realize that it could be the smallest thing that might have been said to them when they were growing up or in childhood that has stuck with them all of this time.
Well, as kids, we're so encouraged to succeed, and you have to win, and if you're not, you're a loser, and that does stay with you. As our biggest, aren't our biggest influences our parents, and what we learn as we grow up?
Yeah, parents, school, even particularly at school, not just from teachers, but from the other children around you as well.
Sure.
Get into their little kind of groups, and if you're not in the cool group, you could be almost tormented or bullied, and that can have an impact on you as well. So
it stays with you for life, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So you are a co-founder of a company called Zinc Global, and that's spelled X-INC. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, where you came from and how you got into this. This is kind of a murky business for a lot of us, coaching and kind of consulting and kind of giving people advice on management. That doesn't kind of compute for a lot of us. How did you start down this road?
Well, I've had a long career, as it were, as a senior leader. I started my career at Hewlett-Packard, one of the best companies I've ever worked for. And, I spent 16 years there, but I moved slowly, progressed into a senior leadership position. And then I've held senior leadership positions ever since.
So what did you do? What's a senior leadership position, for example? What did you actually do?
Yeah, so I ran a large business of, particularly at HP, it was a service and support function across Northern Europe. I headed that up, which included quite a number of field service engineers that would go out and repair equipment on site for customers, 3 large call centers, and also probably about 5 repair centers dotted around Northern Europe. So I managed that big function.
So you managed a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And so how did you start? Go back a little bit into your earlier
Mm.
life. Where did you kind of start out? You're from, tell us where you're from and what your education path was that led you to this life.
Sure. Yeah. So I was born in London, in East London. And as I went into my career, I always wanted to be an engineer,
Hmm.
right? Electronics engineer. And I can remember at high school meeting the careers counselor who had told me that I shouldn't bother thinking so high. I should think about working in a factory or a blue collar type job,
Why
right?
is that?
Well, it, part of it was kind of being stereotyped. My parents came to the UK from the Caribbean, so I was the firstborn. But there was, stereotyping. It's very similar to the situation going on in the US today,
Hmm.
right? There was a lot of racism
Sure.
about. There were a lot of people that came to the country to help rebuild the country following World War II.
Yeah.
But we were not really accepted in this country, and trying to get jobs. People. I used to turn up to interviews and not even get the interview. I can remember, and I'm going back a long time. I was sat in a reception waiting to be interviewed,
Hmm.
and the girl was shocked to see me. She went to the manager who was doing the interview. He kind of poked his head out the door and he looked. I didn't know what he said to her,
And
but
he
she
saw a
came back.
black face and that changed everything.
Yeah, she came back and she said, "Oh, I'm really sorry that the position has been filled."
Ah, jeez. Wow.
So, I had to live through all of those. But when I started my career at HP, I was a field service engineer for a couple of years. Really worked hard because that was what my parents drummed into me.
Hmm.
Became a supervisor after 2 years,
And you did this
managing
all in Europe? You never came to the States to do that?
all in Europe.
Got you.
I've traveled to the States quite a lot, though.
But your
Yeah,
work was based in
in the
England, that
UK
is.
and in
Got you.
Europe.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just built my career over time, went into leadership. I had a natural flair for managing and leading people. It's just
Mm.
because I cared so much about the welfare of people. And on top of that, delivered great results, business results, my team. So it grew there. And the defining moment in my career was where I was actually selected to go on to HP's accelerated development program.
Oh yeah, so I was going to specifically ask you about that as we start talking about
Yeah,
imposter syndrome because that's such a
yeah,
great story, but it folds the whole racial factor into it, which I think, I'm not a black man, what the hell do I know? But I got to believe that for black folks in general, anybody who's different in a room full of people who are not different, that's got to be a daunting experience. I mean, not
oh,
even for racial or gender reasons, but somebody in a wheelchair, for example, anything that makes you
yeah.
different must kind of add to that whole thing. But we'll get to that in a second, I promise, because I thought that was huge.
Sure.
I want to talk first about the major concept that you talk about in Mindset Unlocked, which is this whole idea of the growth mindset. And
Mm.
as I read this, I said, "Oh boy, here comes one of those management terms that you run into these all the time, but this is actually like a real thing, and it actually encompasses so many kind of things on the to-do checklist to basically make life easier, not only as a manager but as an employer." Talk just briefly, broadly, if you can, about the growth mindset and what that means.
Yeah. So, and it took me a while to realize this, and I did a lot of work and a lot of research, but you do realize that, and this is where the self-doubt comes in, because when you believe you can't do anything, or you believe you're not good enough, and sometimes that's because somebody told you that,
Yeah.
and then you've just believed it. That's known as the fixed mindset.
Hmm.
But a growth mindset is somebody who's willing to stretch themselves, get outside of their comfort zone, learn new skills, and more importantly, not afraid of failure.
Mm.
So they fail at something, and rather than give up, they try again and they try again, and they build their skills and their abilities, and then move forward. That's known as having a growth mindset. That's telling yourself that you can do anything if you put your mind to it. So that's why I talk a lot about the growth mindset, because everybody has that ability
Sure.
if they put their mind to it. But there are so many factors that, and we will talk more about this, that really kind of keep people planted where they are, where they don't want to do anything beyond that.
Yeah, I find that when in interviewing people who found out late in life that they can paint or that they can sing or that they can do this comes up all the time. I didn't think, they may not say it in these words, but I didn't think I was allowed to do that. I didn't,
Yeah.
this is not me. And then, so I ask, well, who are you waiting for permission from, and who said that you can't do that? And so much of it has to do with, what you're taught as a kid and whatnot. Um,
Just a
so,
quick note on that.
mhm.
As you mentioned earlier on, I've written some books now. And I always said years ago, I want to be able to write a book. But then I put it off because I said, I don't know how to write a book. I don't know where to start. I don't know who to go to.
Yeah, I
All
hear
of
that
those
all the
things.
time.
Yeah. And eventually one day I just thought, just start by writing a page,
Yeah.
So that's how it started for me. And I enjoyed it.
And there you go. Well, I want to talk later on about your process and how you write, because that always fascinates me. Do you cloister yourself in a dark corner, or do you yell into your iPhone while you're waiting at a red light? I don't know. Everybody has a different thing. But the reason as I said, we come back to what we call imposter syndrome, come upon this all the time, not just in creative life, but, this is part of your career and what you do, kind of showing people the way that, that they can do X, Y, and Z if they can just find a way to set aside, what other people have told them they can or can't do. You talked about that defining moment in your career when you were working at Hewlett Packard. And this is such I just remembered this from the book, and I wanted to have you tell it again. You were
Yeah.
called to Palo Alto, California for this kind of leadership conference. You were one of these people plucked out of the company with, I guess what they told you was you have great potential, and you're kind of a special person in that we think you have leadership potential. And you're sitting there next to the chairman, right? And you're thinking to yourself, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Do I belong here? Blah. And then on top of that, you look around the room and you realize, oh, I'm the only black guy who's in this program.
Yeah.
So that's like on top of one thing on top of another. And I got to believe that that's something that occurs to, people of color all the time, even today. And you
Yeah.
even talked about, the interviews that you went on early on in your career where you were immediately kind of shoehorned into a place that you didn't want to be. So talk a little bit about that to, people out there who might have experienced that.
Yeah. Certainly. I mean, the previous year, and this is how I got selected on the program. I had got promoted into a new role. I was told by my boss, because people didn't believe that I could deliver what I said I was going to deliver. They wanted somebody to come in and completely remodel the business to save money. I was told by the general manager at the time, who had flown in from the US, not to my interview, but he happened to be in the country, so decided he was going to sit in on the interview. And he turned around midway through my presentation and just said, "That's not going to work."
Wow.
So I was shocked, because this is a real senior guy. I mean, I'm not going to argue with him. But one of the other managers said, "Look, it's very different in the UK to the US." Anyway, long story short, I got the job. My boss said to me, "Mike, you've got 6 months to make this work. And if you don't make this work, you're going to lose your job."
Oh, sweet.
So, yeah, more pressure.
Yeah, right.
But, I delivered proof of concept in 2 months. I got everything working, saved the company $3 million, in that year. I'm getting way back to the early 2000s now.
Okay.
As a result of that, they recognized, I thought, wow, this is, a huge achievement.
You
Great
put your money
potential.
where your mouth was,
Yeah.
basically.
And they
Yeah.
saw I, I guess my capabilities. So I got sent on this program. Now I get across the first week in the US, and already I was kind of a shyish person
Was this
anyway.
your first time in the States?
No,
You
no,
had been
no.
in the States
I've
before.
been in the
Okay.
States before,
Okay.
but it was the first time where I had been in a room full of reasonably senior people.
Mm-hmm.
There were about 40 others from around the world who were selected on this program along myself. Well, half of us were from outside of the US, the other half were from within the US.
Mm-hmm.
But what I noticed was how confident they all seemed, how well they were speaking about their businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not good at networking. So I was kind of shying away in the corner. And then we had this dinner. And I was thinking, right, I always go into a room where I'm not sure. I look at, right, where am I going to sit? I try to find the safest place. But someone said, oh, Mike, here, you can sit here. And then the chairman, Lou Platt, was positioned next to me. And I was like, oh my God. And you get these kind of butterflies, because it was like, what do I say to this man? This is a $38 billion company that
Yeah.
this man is leading. I can't say anything stupid to him. So I was trying to think and think and think, what do I say? How do I say it? I couldn't say it. So it was all small talk in the end.
Yeah.
And then I tried to concentrate and speaking to the person on the other side just to look like I was talking. But what happened was I'm stuck between the CEO, and I can't remember who the other person was, but the other person was conversing with the person next to them. Because I weren't talking with the CEO, he was then conversing with the person on his other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sat in the middle like a lemon, not knowing what to do and just hoping to get out of it.
Wow.
But it was a while later that I realized, I didn't realize it at the time, but I realized that, wow, that was imposter syndrome, and the biggest imposter syndrome moment of my life. And I'd realized that what was going through my head was he might think that I'm a fake. He might be thinking, what the hell is this guy doing here? He's not offering anything. He's not talking. He's not showing any level of intelligence. And I was thinking, I do not belong here. Right now, here's the crazy thing about this. I was selected because of my achievements and my abilities. And there was not a single person in that room that came up to me and said, you don't belong here.
Yeah, you did belong there. You actually did belong there.
I belong there on merit and all
Yeah.
of those things. But I was telling myself, no one else, that I didn't belong there. And I thought to myself, when I got back to the hotel, I felt so bad. I thought, I've got to change. I've got to do something about this. I've got to understand, why do I always feel this way? Why do I get these little voices coming in my head?
So how old were you at that moment?
I was probably about 27,
Okay.
28 years old, something
Gotcha.
like that.
Okay.
So I was a young manager by comparison up at that level.
Yeah, sure.
And that's one of the things that made me feel overwhelmed, because I knew I was one of the youngest in the room. I was the only Black person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt threatened by everybody. Even in the little workshops we did during the week, and we'd break out into, little breakout groups, I couldn't contribute because I just felt so out of place. I didn't want to say something stupid, so that's how it was for me. So I thought, I got to do something about this.
And so how did you embark on that mission, of self-improvement, and how long did it take?
Yeah.
Or are you still working on it?
You're always working on it, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it did take a while, and it came from a number of different things. So, when I got back into my job, I continued to work hard and deliver results, and I got more confident being able to kind of speak up more. But I really focused on, and that program as well, it gave you a mentor and a sponsor for a whole year. So I worked with a vice president of the company who I spent a lot of time with, and I got really comfortable being able to ask questions and all sorts, and he really coached me. I went on a few business schools as well. but I also went on a Dale Carnegie public speaking training program.
Ah, Dale
And that was
Carnegie.
one of
Yeah.
the things that did it for me. It
Yeah, that
was,
actually helped you, huh? Because I've always
oh,
heard
wow.
mixed reviews about the whole Dale Carnegie approach, and
Yeah.
probably would
Well, it was a
benefit you.
10-week program. I say 10 weeks. It was once a week for 2 hours in the evening.
Okay.
And they would go through a number of things about kind of building your confidence. And then on the 10th week, they said, if it's possible, get your manager to come.
Mm.
So I asked my manager at the time, and I was surprised. He did actually come. And he did say to me, because we had to do short presentations and things like that, he said, Mike, you are so different. I have never seen you being so confident, so assertive. And that lifted me from there.
Yeah, of course.
So I just built on that. But it wasn't till years later, when I moved to different companies, like I moved to Microsoft, and I was at the BBC, delivering results, like significant results in those companies. And I'd moved into industries because everywhere I worked for a little while was a new industry for me. So there was already a steep learning curve there, but it was my transferable leadership skills that kind of got me through it. So as a result of that, I, started to have so much confidence that I was coaching and mentoring people anyway.
Yeah.
People wanted to know, how did you manage to deliver those results under that amount of pressure? And, how did you deal with all of that? So
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have been a good addition to my former job that I got fired from. That's another whole thing. But yeah, I mean, hey, it's never too late to learn. I learned from my mistakes too.
Have you been thinking about writing your story? You can do it. Self-Publishing, a Guide by Tom Krantz is your introduction. Millions of aspiring authors have self-published memoirs, fiction, fantasy, all kinds of stories without the hassle of finding agents, publishers, and the approval of strangers. Self-Publishing, a Guide by Tom Krantz is your first step. Get it on Amazon as a downloadable ebook or paperback. Self-Publishing, a Guide by Tom Krantz. It's time to explore the author within.
Did you find then that, as many Black people have told me, that you had to work a little harder to prove yourself every step along the way just because of your race?
For sure, yeah. And, it's interesting, but I was the one who put that pressure on myself. My mum in particular, God rest her soul, always used to tell me to work hard and to work twice as hard. And there was this thing that you had to work twice as hard to be half as good as the people there. And, I worked on leadership teams where I knew I was a better performer, more knowledgeable, more experienced than other people. But they were the ones getting the promotion.
Yeah.
But it was a different time then. But, if I'm honest, if I look at my career, I rose through the ranks. It was hard.
Obviously.
I rose through the ranks. So,
yeah, but you obviously worked hard, and you took your own advice too. I'm guessing. You talk up. There was one chapter that I made note of because I think that a lot of people can identify with the concept of emotional intelligence. So this is a chapter that you call enhancing emotional intelligence. And I'm going to read the first three sentences, because this just applies to so many people in so many different situations. Have you ever felt your emotions driving you around without a GPS, leaving you stranded in a mental traffic jam? Welcome to the chaotic world of human emotions, where the only constant is change and the only certainty is uncertainty. Emotional intelligence is the trusty map that can guide you through this intricate landscape, often hailed as the secret sauce of effective leadership. Boy, I think anybody can identify with that whole idea that you've got all this stuff zooming around in your brain, you've got this pit in your stomach, and it just throws everything off. So in comes emotional intelligence. How do you define that?
Yeah, emotional intelligence is really down to things like your attitude, how you respond to situations. For example, and you may have experienced this yourself working for so many leaders in terms of, if you look at the leadership styles, there are leaders that might rule with an iron fist. It's like, what I say goes.
Right.
So they manage what we call manage by fear, basically. Everybody's scared.
I had one of those.
Expected. But emotional intelligence is having that ability to take a step back, to pause and really think about what your next step is going to be, and trying to do it in the most logical way. And more importantly, at time, if you are extremely frustrated or you're angry, that's when those pauses are most important. Just take a moment to breathe. And I'll give you a couple of examples of my early days. I would get angry about something from a message that somebody sent me. And back then, this is my HP days, I didn't care if you were more senior than me or not, right? I would blast the message out, which was exactly how I felt. And I realized after a while that, Mike, that's not the right approach to take.
Yeah, but it probably made you feel good at the time for about 20 seconds.
Yeah,
right?
and then you think, wow, it didn't really help me in the long run. Yeah. So what I used to do, and I mean, even sometimes I wouldn't respond to an email immediately. I'd wait till the next day sometimes.
Yeah, I learned that too.
Even if they said, look, I need an answer from you, I'd even wait till the next day. And I would just then come with a more logical approach. And my logical approach in most cases was just to lay out and be as factual as possible.
Yeah.
Pull that emotion out of the messages and just state facts. And sometimes it's hard to pull those emotions out when people are really getting you wound up.
Yeah, of course. So one of the other lines from that first paragraph is, you say, emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage both your emotions and those of others. So managing my emotions, I get that, but can you really manage the emotions of others?
You can, without even them realizing it. And I'll give you a really good example of that. I've had situations where people have been really angry, and I'm talking sometimes senior people, and they're raising their voice. They're shouting at you. And, it's so natural to then raise your voice so that you're on the same level.
Sure.
And, one of the best things to do is to control that, is just speak normally and calmly, even if they are still shouting, because within a few moments, they're going to drop the level of their voice down. And that's how you kind of control their emotions.
Does that work all the time?
It works most of the time, believe it or not. Yeah. I don't know if it's a psychological thing, but it does actually work. And it's if you're remaining calm and they're going on and shouting, after a while they think, Christ, I'm being a bit of an idiot here. The person's like, why are they so calm? And then you kind of lower your voice naturally.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's probably the odd occasion where it won't work, but I think most of the time it does work, particularly in the workplace.
Yeah.
I can't really speak for outside the workplace, but in the workplace, that generally works.
All right. And the last concept I want to talk about is this whole idea that we learn more from our failures than from our successes. I think that's a quote from Bill Gates. And I have to say, I think you do learn from your successes too. We don't want to eliminate learning from our successes, but I always come back to this famous quote by NASA's mission controller during the Apollo mission, Gene Kranz, who is no relation to me, but spells his name the same way I do, which is so rare. And he said during Apollo 13, which was the mission where the astronauts almost died, they had to bring them back, he said failure is not an option. And that was his way of saying, if we fail, those guys are going to die. Yeah. But the reality is that failure is always an option. The question is that you pose in the book is, what do you do with that? And so what do you do with that?
Yeah. Failure is a learning opportunity. You have to look at failure always as a learning opportunity. And one of the things I always say is failure is not the opposite of success. Okay, it's a prerequisite of success. So you should always figure out what it was that went wrong. Why did that fail? What could I have done differently? And really start to analyze, spend that time, analyze, because that's where you're learning and that's where you're also growing.
I know, but
As
that's so hard for so many people to do. It's like looking at your mirror, picking out every single zit and saying, it's like looking at the reality. That's hard for people.
It is hard, but this is where that growth mindset plays its part because, as I mentioned to you earlier on, sometimes when people fail, it's so easy to give up. It's so easy to say, I've had enough of that. That happens a lot, probably in sports or the arts, right? Where people might be learning to play an instrument, they can't get it right, they give up. Or if somebody wants to become, a sportsman and they're told they're not good enough or they find it difficult to compete, right? They give up, but you just got to keep training. You've got to keep building the skill and things I'm not talking about the elite sportsmen because they have something rather special to get to that level, right?
Yeah.
But just kind of in general, you can always build your skill and your ability in anything that you do.
Well, this is so relevant for people in the arts, especially writers, as an author myself, who has pitched, my fantastic work to agents and publishers, rejection is part of the game. And I'm reminded of the woman who wrote the novel, The Help, whose name, of course, escapes me now. But that was, that became an Academy Award-winning film.
Yeah.
And she submitted that manuscript to 60 different publishers, rejected 60 times before somebody finally said, yeah, fine. And that's a great example of just keeping going. But, I can also see where, people, especially in the arts, they say, maybe I don't have it. Maybe my parents were right. I'm never going to make a living at this. So I might as well go back to fixing air conditioners. And that can be like a tragic loss, because who knows where that skill, that talent might have gone, right?
And you're absolutely right. And I always say if people are in that situation, if it's something that you truly love, don't give up. But if you feel that, oh yeah, this might be too hard, then you've got to find something that you are going to enjoy and you are going to love, and not just do something because it sits within your comfort zone. And this is one of the problems with imposter syndrome. People that have it are happiest within their comfort zone. And the only way that you can grow and develop is you have to step outside of the comfort zone. You move into a fear zone to start with.
Right. So you're afraid of succeeding, really, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's easy to jump back into, oh, well, this is where I'm most comfortable.
Yeah.
So there's a whole thing about, being in a comfort zone and moving into that growth zone, they call it. And the area in between the two is the fear zone. And that fear zone is you either think, oh, Christ, I really can't do this. Let me get back in my comfort zone. Or I'm going to stick this through and I'm going to keep trying until I get it. And then that puts you into your growth zone.
Gotcha.
And it widens then your comfort zone. Your comfort zone gets bigger, right, as you learn. So the most comfortable or confident people are the ones who've got the largest comfort zones because they have pushed the boundaries continually to learn new skills and develop further.
Right. So you seem to veer out of your comfort zone when you decided to write a book, right? And that's like, you told me earlier that it was like, I don't know anything about writing a book, and now you've written 3 books. Tell me about by the time you got to your 3rd book, you probably had this down a little bit, okay, I've done this twice. I kind of got the mechanics. I know kind of my own process. How did you actually do that? Did you just decide one day you started writing, or did you have an outline, or how did you do it?
I did have an outline, and a lot of the outline, when I thought about how do I actually write this book, I thought the only thing I can write about are my experience, my observations and my experiences. This is where these books came from, because, you mentioned earlier on about the bad managers you've had. I've had a few bad managers, but I learned from them. I learned what not to do. I learned, I don't want to be like them. So what do I do differently?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of pulled in all of those life experiences to write the book, which is why, like, if you take Mindset Unlocked, for example, I start off with that big imposter syndrome moment with Lou Platt. And then I did some research. I wanted to know, well, who else feels this way? You know, and it's everybody, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
I thought, right, well, let me see who, so that in the book I can reference some well-known people that the reader might think, oh, wow, you know, Einstein, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Serena Williams, imposter syndrome. That's crazy that these successful people feel that way. So I can understand why I feel that way also. So,
So then did you pop out of bed one morning at 3 a.m. in the dark and say, okay, I'm going to run over to my computer right now and start tapping this out?
Well, not quite at 3 a.m, but no, I used to spend quite a bit of time during the day just, you know, sitting in my office and thinking. And again, I would kind of write a chapter or two, or I'd, you know, write for as much as I can, and then I'd review it and try and break it up so it starts to kind of make sense. And then I'd put it down for a while, because I always found I just couldn't do it continuously. So I would come back to it and think, right, okay, now I want to talk. I knew what the next bit was. So I thought, this is what I want to cover next. What do I want to say about that? How do I cover it? What do I want to reference?
Now, one of the axioms of writing is to write what you know, and you have certainly done that. And we've been talking, folks, about Mike's book, Mindset Unlocked. I got to tell you, this is a great book for anybody who's ever worked in a corporate environment, a non-corporate environment. There's stuff in here that's relevant for a single member LLC who deals with vendors and deals with people. So much of this is about communicating and effective communicating, which is such an Achilles heel in every single place I've ever worked, you know, just basic communications. Mike, tell us again how people can find you either online, on social media, et cetera.
Yeah, well, I'm actually on LinkedIn. I'm fairly easy to find, but I'll provide the link to you within my LinkedIn profile. You know, if people want to reach out to me directly,
it'll be in the show notes for this, and also you have a Calendly element there where people can actually reach out to you and book a session, like a Zoom session, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and I always welcome that. If somebody wants to know more about imposter syndrome, because I actually coach people. I run a personalized coaching program for people who, you know, lacking confidence or have a lot of self-doubt, and, you know, turn people into being a little bit more positive and feeling better about themselves in terms of how they do that.
I highly recommend Mindset Unlocked. There's a lot of stuff in there, but there's something in there for just about everybody. Mike Seeley, I really appreciate your time. Good luck to you, and thanks for being with me.
I appreciate that, Tom. Thank you very much.